in the box for the family night on the lawn that we had this Friday. So we're going to be using a worship video that we made closer to the beginning of this year, and the songs actually feels just right for tonight. So with that said, I'm going to open us in prayer, and then I'm going to share the video. So if you would, pray with me. The Lord be with you. Father God, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the gift of this time with each other and with you. Lord, you are our refuge and our strength. We're always ready to help in times of trouble, so we will not fear. Father God, as we offer you this time of worship, would you ground us in your Holy Spirit, ground us in who you are, in your truth. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. See if I can share this with you all.
Never fails me. For all my days I've been held by your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. For all my days I've been held by your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. So good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other, and I've known you as a father, known you as a friend, and I have lived the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing the goodness of God. Oh yeah, your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. will sing the goodness of God.
Thanks, Tim. So, Bishop Wood, if you and Father Kendall would both turn your back on, and I will just say a greeting and a welcome to both of you. And for those with us, I count Steve as one of my longest clergy friends in my life, and had some very special and very tender moments that I've shared with him. And I'm thrilled to have him here. And so, Dr. Harmon, I'll give him to you, and welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Craig.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's our honor and privilege to host Steve Wood, who is, among many other things, he is the Bishop of the Diocese of the Carolinas in ACNA, and also the Rector of St. Andrew's Mount Pleasant in South Carolina. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us, Steve.
Yeah, it's good to be here tonight, Kendall. I appreciate Craig inviting me, and I enjoy his parish and the opportunities I've had to be down there in the past, and looking forward to the night.
We want to have a conversation to kind of build up the people who are listening and encourage their faith. And I want to start just by talking about your personal background. Not everybody, sorry about this, but not everybody at Christ St. Paul's knows you. So tell us a little bit about your family of origin, where you grew up, and how you came to faith yourself.
Yeah. So I'm guessing some of you were around when Petticoat Junction and Green Acres were on television. And
back when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Yeah. So the creator of those shows was actually from my father's locale, Eldon, Missouri, which is in the Missouri Ozarks, middle of nowhere. And my father was every bit Hooterville. And my mom grew up on Madison Avenue at 74th Street on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And wow. She was every bit Zsa Zsa Gabor in every way. And it was a fascinating mix. They had mutual friends in Cleveland, and they were both in town to see these friends, and the mutual friends were all together one night. My dad met my mom, and my mom had never met anyone like my dad. And he made her laugh. He made the family laugh. And he was, basically an electrician. He worked in elevators. The technical title was an elevator adjuster. And he grew up in a mixed kind of Assembly of God. One of his uncles, my Uncle Charlie, was actually was one of the early founders of the Assembly of God world, one of their pastors. So he grew up in Assembly of God and a Missionary Baptist, which is a very interesting world. One speaks in tongues and is Pentecostal. One denies all of that. And my mom was Anglican, and she called the shots. She went to St. James on the Upper East Side, and Arthur Kinsolving was her rector, and her father was on the vestry. And so I grew up in many ways probably similar in Cleveland. They settled there. That was the locale. And my mom, I grew up going to church. I went to Missouri Synod Lutheran grade school. My mom wanted me to go to kindergarten when I was 4, and the public schools wouldn't take me because I was too young, so she put me in the Lutheran school. I'm grateful for it. Starting in kindergarten, we had to start memorizing Bible verses and portions of Luther's Small Catechism. And we did that. You had a Bible verse a week. By first grade, you had a Bible verse a week for 9 years, 1st through 8th grade. And starting in 5th grade, you had to start memorizing most of Luther's Small Catechism. Came out of there, went to Roman Catholic High School, and encountered Jesuits for the first time, and brothers, and that was it was good in many ways. They certainly had a social conscience that I was awakened to. Wouldn't have known that language at that time, but appreciated their emphasis on faith in action. I grew up in a charismatic Episcopal church. My home church was St. Andrew's in Mentor, Ohio, but I spent a lot of time at St. Luke's in Bath with their youth group, and got to know Chuck Irish. Got to know Kelly, because Kelly was a youth advisor when I was going down there for They had every first Saturday of the month, they had this big thing called Saturday Night Alive, big worship. Wally Schilling led it. He's a rector now, well, retired, I guess, now in Florida. But and so I went to these things. I was attracted to them. Looking back, I could definitely say I felt the pull of the Spirit. There did come a point, though, for good or bad, I live in my mind more than heart, and I question a lot of things. And I certainly would have had some of my dad's cynicism toward faith. He got a lot of bad experiences as a kid, and he was very cynical toward the church. And but I remember probably early 20s, my old youth advisor asked me to go to this thing called Faith Alive, and he'd asked me to go. It was kind of like the Alpha of its day, and he asked me so many times, and I told him no so many times. I really ran out of excuses. It was March in Northeast Ohio. There's nothing else to do in March except go to something. And what was different for me, it was the first time I heard lay people talking about their faith. Right? I'd always heard clergy or teachers. I never heard a lay person talking about their faith. And so it's a Friday night, all day Saturday, Sunday morning. And I was listening to talk after talk. And as much as I'm an upfront person because I'm bishop and rector, I'm not an upfront person by nature. So if I'm not leading, if there's a balcony, I'm in the last row of the balcony. That's my nature. And that's where I was. And by Saturday night, I was very moved by what I was hearing. And it was very specific. People spoke specifically about how God and the Holy Spirit had interacted in their life. And I didn't know that. I had a lot of knowledge. I learned a lot of Bible verses. I still know a good bit of Luther's catechism. And I remember sitting in the balcony and saying, if this is real and what they're doing is real, I want that. And that was not a very profound prayer, but God honored that prayer. And it first was brought to my attention a couple weeks later by a girl named Susie Matteo. I grew up in an Italian Catholic neighborhood. I was the only Irish Protestant in an Italian Catholic neighborhood, and most of my friends' parents immigrated from Italy. And so we were going to college together, and Susie, it's about a month, and Susie said, "Stevie, what's happened to you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You're just different." I said, "What does that mean?" She's like, "You're nice." And I didn't know. I'm like, "Susie, and it took a little while. And the thought came back into my mind. You prayed this prayer. And I went and talked to Chuck Irish about it. And Chuck started talking to me about how faith comes alive and what that looks like. And then there was the conscious assent, right? The conscious assent and a willingness to surrender to the Lordship of Christ. And I generally don't talk about accepting Christ. I talk about submitting and acknowledging to Christ. I don't know. I don't accept a Lord. I recognize He is Lord and submit myself to Him. And so, and that, early 20s, that began to totally change the trajectory of my life. I was in college. I was a history major and a history political science major. So I love politics. I'm fascinated by what's going on right now, just from a political point of view. And I wanted to go to law school, and I wanted to be a prosecutor because I wanted to put bad guys in jail, and I wanted to ensure that there was justice. And then I wanted to run for a political office. And that was kind of the trajectory I thought my life was on. And I just started, we didn't call them life groups or small groups. We just called them Bible study groups. And over time, I would go to these things, and I wasn't the leader, but over time, I just naturally became the leader because I was very interested and had ideas and questions and ended up leading these things. And I ultimately started a young adult. We just called it young adult then, but it was basically college and slightly older. And we probably, without even thinking about what we were doing, but within probably 6 months, we had 200 young adults showing up at these things. And then people started asking me if I'd ever thought about being ordained. And I'm like, no. And because I really knew what I wanted to do. I also wanted to make money. And so clergy was not on that list. And so it was really, Chuck Irish talked to me, but then my rector that I grew up under came to me And he asked me, he said, do you remember, he said, you were probably in kindergarten or first grade, and you came to me with tears in your eyes asking why, that my teacher at school talked about Jesus had to die for me. And you were upset by that. And he said, and we sat down on the steps, and he said, we talked about it. And he said, you know, I'm what, 6, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in that age. And he said, I've never told you this, but I thought the Lord told me at that moment you were going to be ordained, that you had a heart for the Lord. And that helped, right? That external confirmation. And so it did change the course. I met I knew Jackie. We met when she was 13 and I was 15. And she went to the equivalent of Ashley Hall. And her bus changed. She changed buses at my high school. So I would see her. I knew her older. I was good friends with her older sister. And so
I'm going to stop you there just because we're two quick questions.
Yep.
One is, where did you do your undergrad?
Yep.
The poly. Where did you do that?
So I started at Bowling Green in Ohio, and there were some. For those that know me, you might not be surprised about this, but my parents had some marital issues. My father left the home for a while, and I was
very different backgrounds.
Oh,
very different backgrounds. Yeah,
very.
Wow.
And I went to him, and I told him I did not want him to have the satisfaction of paying for my college. And so I withdrew from Bowling Green and transferred to Cleveland State so I could pay my own way through it because I didn't want to accept any money from my dad.
Okay, that was just a factual question. And then one other one, just do you have any siblings as you're
I do.
flying?
Yeah, I got a little brother Chris. Well, little, he's 50. He's still my little brother. And
littler all the time.
Yeah, he's an executive chef in Cleveland, and he's married to a forensic psychologist who's a forensic psychologist for 5 counties in Ohio. And and they have no kids. I married Jack when she was 19, I was 22. Went off to seminary. I mean, it was a big moment because we had been reconnected and started dating. Well, as adults, right? I mean, 18 and 21. I mean, we weren't really adults. We were kids, but we thought we were adults. And I remember telling her I'd had this conversion experience, and I really thought this would end the relationship. I said, I think I'm supposed to be a priest. Well, her dad was the organist in my church growing up. And she said, I always wanted to marry a priest. And I thought, well, how about that? So got married off to seminary, went to Virginia Seminary, had 1 child right away, Aaron, who's now, we've been married 34 years, he's 33. He's married and has a child, Lucas, who's 9. He lives in Montana. He was a captain in the Air Force, got medically retired, rolled into a government job on the same base. He's married to a physical therapist named Jesse. Second son, Tim, was born at seminary. I think I met Kendall at seminary. We had a group we called ACEs, which was Anglo-Catholics and Evangelicals. And we brought in speakers, and Kendall was one of them. Fitz, so I first met Bishop Fitz. And my second son, Tim, was born there. Tim's now 30. He works in commercial real estate, Meyer Cap. So some of you guys might know Woody, and he works very closely with Woody. Loves it. Answer to prayer. One of the prayers we've always prayed for our kids is that they would have good in-laws and good employers. And my son has phenomenal in-laws and great employer. He's married to a woman named Katie. She's an ophthalmologist at Storm Eye Institute. They have no kids yet. Son 3 was born in my first parish, and it was actually where my dad came to faith. He had returned home by that time. I was 33. He'd returned home. I wouldn't say our relationship was very good. And Tim's godparents are a clergy couple up in Massachusetts, and they couldn't come in for the baptism. And my dad said, well, I'll stand in. And I just kind of disdainfully said, well, you have to believe in something in order to stand in as a godparent. And I'm, there was it was tense. And he said, well, I think I could. And so I talked to him, and I ended up actually in that conversation praying with him about coming to faith. Which was extraordinary. And a month later, his little brother, Dwayne, my uncle Dwayne, who was my godfather, came to faith in my office at the church also, which was pretty ironic to lead your father and your godfather to faith. So Nick is married to a woman named M. Nick works for Moody & Associates, and it's an auditing firm. M works at MUSC. She's actually one of the administrators of this COVID testing program that MUSC is doing. And our baby Sammy is senior Clemson. He was supposed to graduate in 4 years in June. He was a microbiology major, but he also added a chemistry major. And so he wants to, and I told him, I had a very nice 2006 Mustang, right? The black looked like the Steve McQueen. And I told Sammy, if he got a 4-point at college, he can have it. And so he's got a 4-point. So I gave it to him in September. Told him if he blows this semester, it's coming back. But
we're going to get to seminary in a second. Say a word about Jackie, though, while
so
we're
Jack,
talking about.
yeah. So Jack is a nurse at MUSC. She's in the Meduflex pool, and so she likes the variety. So she floats across floors, and she's specifically been floating. Well, she's done a lot of COVID work this fall. She's done a lot of COVID work, but when she's not on that floor, she often gets floated into the babies, and she loves the baby. Sean Jenkins.
And very impressively, she went back to school to become a nurse.
She did. It was really funny. As the boys were getting older, someone said to her something about, well, the boys are older, you can pursue your dream. And I was with her, and I knew the look. And first she was mad, and then she got teary. And she said, my dream was to be a wife and a mother, and my boys don't need me anymore. And now I got to figure out what to do with my life. And so it was either teacher or nurse. So she went back, she dropped out when we got married. She was a sophomore at Kent State. I was a senior at Cleveland State. So she was a sophomore at Kent State. She dropped out. Well, she stayed in until she got pregnant. Then she dropped out and went back to school, got her associates, and then got the job at MUSC. Then MUSC really wanted their nurses to get BSNs. She graduated summa cum laude. And
good for her.
Yeah, it was good. It was fun to watch. And she loves what she does. And in the church, she ends up we have a ministry called MOLO, which is Mothers of Little Ones. And so she was speaking today to probably about 50 young moms, just that phase of life. And so she really, really likes engaging with young women.
Okay, now back to seminary, just in terms of, now I want to talk about you as a kind of a minister. So let's go back to Virginia Seminary. This is the poli-sci guy who wants to be a politician and make money. But now you're at seminary. You got one child. You're married to Jackie, and you're doing theology. I
was. And
so what was that like for the kid from Cleveland?
It was Virginia. So growing up in the Diocese of Ohio, by the late 70s, it had jumped the theological shark. Right. So stuff that South Carolina has experienced in the last decade was already happening in Diocese of Ohio. So Virginia was off limits because it was too conservative. But I did pretty well in college. And so Virginia gave me a $10,000 a year academic scholarship. And none of the seminaries that the bishop wanted me to go to could match that. So he relented. I went to go to Virginia. And it happened to be an evangelical charismatic revival at that time. David Scott, who is was a theology professor, had assumed the chair. Marion Mix had retired. A guy named Chris Hancock had come on staff. Walter Eversley had come on staff. Bob Pritchard, still there, I guess, just maybe recently retired, and Dick Reed, who was the dean. So you had this phenomenal evangelical renaissance. Combine that with Father Francis Martin over at the Dominican House, who taught New Testament and who is also charismatic. And it was, for me, it was the most extraordinary time. Now, I went there kind of with my fists up because I'd heard Virginia was liberal. And so the guy that wants to be a lawyer, I like to argue. And so, within my first 2 weeks of class and lecture, I mean, I'd gone on a lot of people. I'd gone at the professors. Just the assumption was that they were liberal. I never even bothered to find out that assumption was right. And, this is before email. So the refectory where we had lunch, they had a big bulletin board, and they'd put a folded note on the board if they needed. So it said Steve Wood, and I opened it, said, please see Dr. He was my theology colloquy leader, Chris Hancock. He was associate professor of theology under David. And so said, please report to Dr. Hancock's office such a time. He'd like to speak to you about your performance. And I said, okay, here we go. and Chris, who is as thoroughly, I mean, he's been scholar in residence with me for the last 3 years and a great friend now. But I remember, and he was 32 at the time, I was 22. And he said, "Is there a ditch you're not willing to die in?" And I thought about it. And I'm thinking, is this a trick question? And I said, "No, I'm willing to die in all of them." And he said, "Well, you won't make it out of seminary." And then he shared his faith with me. And so every year you had a colloquy group. So my junior year, which is your first year of seminary, was Chris Hancock. My middle year was David Scott. And my senior year was Chris Hancock again. So I had this phenomenal period of formation with some really good minds. Introduced me, I had not, history and I liked philosophy, liked logic, took those as a lot of electives, but theology was very different. Probably took a good semester and a half to really get to engage, how to engage the primary sources. And I enjoyed it. And I lightened up a bit once I realized that there were actual believers on campus. And it was really one of the best periods of our life together. We really look back fondly. I met Craig there. Like I said, you wouldn't have not remembered me, but you came in to talk to our group.
I remember you. That's a long time ago.
It was a long
time.
So
let's fast forward to, okay, so you get out of seminary and you start ministry where?
I did. So Walter Eversley taught a class our senior year of seminary how to start or restart a mainline church. And you had to ask your bishop for a case study. And the class project was you would develop a 5-year plan to present to the bishop. So I always wanted to go to this church called St. Anne's in Madison, which is where Jeff Chapman was for probably 12 years. And he left. It was open 5 years after Jeff left. And I kept telling the bishop, I want to go to that church. He said, "There's no way I'm going to put a 26-year-old as a rector in the church." But he let me study it. Well, he liked the plan. So in September, my senior year, he said, "You're a free agent. You can go anywhere you want in the church. We don't know if we have a job." Called me in December, said, "Are you going to be home over Christmas?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Come in and see me." And he said, "If you want St. Anne's, I'll give it to you. I liked your plan." And so I go there. And again, my salary in 1991 was $14,800. And I delivered papers in the morning to make ends meet. And Jackie was home with the boys. We homeschooled during this time too. And so, and we were out right on the very far edge of the Cleveland suburbs. So if Mount Pleasant was Cleveland, people at my age and income, we were 40 miles away. That's what we could afford. And so we were way out there. And I was there. Chuck Irish also, he encouraged me to adopt this practice when I was a young guy, and I did. I've never applied for a position. I asked for St. Anne's. But when Chuck really was talking to me, good mentor, Roger Ames, who became a bishop, was a really good mentor in this time, just looking out for me, knew me from my teenage years. And I really developed a mentality. I would never apply for a position. I would shepherd faithfully the flock that God has given me. And if God wanted me, he knew what field I was in, and he would send people to find me. And my biblical model for that was David, right? Out in the fields, overlooked by his own family, he was found. And so I really adopted that. So I was there 4.5 years, and all of a sudden, simultaneously, I got 3 job offers. Sam Pasco down at Christ Church in Orange Park, Florida. Mike Flynn out at St. Jude's in Burbank. And then Roger Ames. And at this point in time, my theology still had I still carried the idea that God had a single plan for my life. It never occurred to me that he could put 4 or 5 good choices before me. And it was actually, we were agonizing over this. I mean, agonizing. And it was Christmas, and my boys had each gotten $100 from my parents. And we took them to Toys R Us. And I said, "Boys, you got $100 to spend. You can get anything you want in the store." And just this thought came into my mind: Steve, you have 4 good choices before you. no matter which one you choose, I'll be with you. Each one will have a consequence. Your life will go in a particular direction. All of them are good choices. Where do you want to go? And at that point, having been rector for almost 5 years, or just right at 5, I really knew I needed to learn a lot. And we were poor. I mean, I'd accrued debt, and St. Luke's was a known place. It was close to family. They paid the best. I went from 21,600 to 42,000 in a week, and I thought I was, in high cotton, and it was a place for us of healing. I was the senior associate. I walked in and took over a building campaign, and so because St. Luke's built a whole new facility when we were there, about 3 miles away from where we were, so we moved locations. And for all of us, it was really a healing location. It was so full of grace. Roger's mantra was grace and mercy. Very grateful for that time.
You were there how long?
Right at 5 years. And then St. Andrews. So St. Andrews went after Nicky Gumbel. I appreciate, after Terrell Glenn left. So they went after Nicky Gumbel. And I was on a pastor's board of Alpha USA by this time. I started running Alpha when it was just audio tapes, right? Cassette tapes. And Nicky said, I think the guy you need is in Akron, Ohio. And then they went after Mike Breen. And Mike Breen said, I think the guy you want is in Akron, Ohio. And it was funny because a group flew up, and this one woman, she's at St. Philip's right now, Frenchie Richards, was on the team that flew up. And St. Luke's had like 30 acres of land, big fields. And I was preaching a wedding. They wanted to hear me preach. And I said, we're doing a wedding. And they said, we can't come. I said, oh no, it's St. Luke's. Weddings are open events. The reception is closed, but anybody in the church is welcome to attend the wedding, period. And so I said, just wear a jacket and tie and sit in the back. I mean, you'll be fine. And so they drove in, but I was way back in the fields. And Frenchie had this word that we're going to find. This is one of the things she had told the search team that was coming up. She was on the search team. She said, I really think the Lord said, we're going to find a David out in the fields. And so they pull in, and I'm literally out in 25 acres of fields walking toward, I saw the car coming. So I was walking toward because I was just out there praying, and I'm walking in my collar, and I remember just the looks, and, but no one said anything. And so that was right at 2000. Another woman that some of you will know probably is Joanne Ellison. She was the person that first called me. It was January of 2000. Northeast Ohio had just had 30 consecutive days below freezing. And Joanne, out of the blue, calls me and tells me who she is. And she said, your name's come in at St. Luke's. Mark Bouton also put my name in at St. Andrews. And we want to know if you'd talk to us. I'm like, yes. And got my attention. Although the discernment process is hard, right? It's just hard. I mean, I don't get, when God leads me, I just don't get traffic sign kind of things. And we really felt led to Psalm 16, which has really carried us in many ways. And one of the lines was David said, the boundary lines of my life have fallen in pleasant places. And we really thought that meant stay in Akron. We just built a house. I was going to take over as rector. I was kind of in the succession plan because St. Luke's always promoted the senior associate to rector. I was in that transition process, and everybody I knew and loved lived within a 45-minute radius of me. College friends, high school friends, everybody, family.
Yeah, and Ohio was home.
It was home. I mean, it was, sure. And we were in Northeast Ohio, which kind of looks like the rolling hills of North Carolina, right? It's my town had an elevation of 2,700 feet, right? It was rolling hills. It was beautiful. Western Ohio's flat like Kansas, but our part was hills. So we really thought, okay, that's it. Well, then we just never had a peace, and we came back to the Psalm again. And we started going back. Well, where do we think God spoke to us? We went back but we read the Psalm all the way to the end this time. And at the end, it said, at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. And what we really worked through, Jack and I, was what that meant was if we were in God's will, we would know his pleasure. And then we said, maybe his will is for us to move. And so we went down for the interview. And it was, I think it was hard on their end. Two other guys were in the process with me, and the process really went on from January, first contact with Joanne, and they ended up calling me at the end of June, right last weekend in June. They issued the call, and it was hard. My mother was devastated that we were leaving. My dad, who had really, the life transformation in him was extraordinary. And actually one of my most profound sadnesses was, his birthday was October 4th, mine's the 12th. And he died a week or so before his 70th birthday. So I was 39, he was 69. And so we had probably 6 good years, redemptive years. And my dad pulled me aside. My dad called me Stevie, and he said, Stevie, you got to do what's best for your family. And if you think this is best, your mom will get over it. you need to go. And I remember telling him, the senior warden then was a guy named Howard Rambo. And Howard said in the meeting with the vestry and the search committee, where do you see yourself in 25 years? And I said, God willing, the rector of St. Andrews. And I remember thinking at the time, I was 36, I'm thinking, good grief, I'll be 61. And here I am in my 21st year at St. Andrews. And it's been, for me, it's been extraordinary. I love the parish.
Say a word about your time at St. Andrews and then the transition to being bishop in Akron.
Yep. So we, it was hard. That transition out of the Diocese of South Carolina was very difficult. I was very, very close to Ed Salmon, very close. Ed, even after he retired, I'd get random, he would just drop in. And I remember just before he died, when it was like maybe his last trip in, he looked terrible. He came by unannounced and said, I just wanted to see my guys. And it was me and Anthony Kobadu and Burley. And he said, boys, I think this is the last time you'll see me. And we prayed together. And it was tough. And just that transition, I was a candidate for bishop in South Carolina, me, Mark, and Ellis Brust. Yeah. And that was a good experience. Jackie really, she told me at the time, she said, this is the right thing, but the wrong time. And she said, you're going to lose. and everyone lost big. Mark swept it on first round with 70% of the vote, and which was awesome. He's been a great bishop. He's been the guy you guys have needed. But it was always a tension for us because in the search document that St. Andrews submitted with Ed Salmon's approval, it open paragraph said the next rector must be willing to lead St. Andrews out of the Episcopal Church, period. And so I knew that in 2000. So my framework was, we're not leaving until there's something recognized to go to. We're not going to be part of one of the fragmenting groups. And so in 2009, and I was on, I forgot what committee I was on because Craig was on it too, but some kind of pre-committee to the ACNA. The ACNA formed in June of 2009. I happened to be a delegate to General Convention in June of 2009. You skipped that one. You were texting me at home saying, go say this and go say this. And I was asking you, I need some theological ammo. Give me some things here. And we submitted, South Carolina submitted something and they wouldn't recognize me to read it from the floor. And so I blogged it and it got picked up by the New York Times. It was crazy. And, but I was done. I walked out of that convention. I said, I'm done. And I went home and I told my vestry, I'm leaving. I think we're all supposed to leave. I'm done. Because they passed BO 39, which was the disciplinary canon that changed Title IV that ultimately hamstrung Mark. And I was like, I'm out. And so, and I told Mark, I said, I think I'm going. I think the parish might go with me. So we did 40 days of discernment, which was really longer. It started in September, it ended in December. And we have people in small groups. We were looking at the materials where the Episcopal Church was, the issues of the day. Now my parameter of an entity has to exist. I talked a lot with Mark. I brought him into the vestry. And his integrity was extraordinary because we told him in a vestry meeting, give us a nod, a wink, drop your pencil. If you're going to leave, we'll stay. If you're going to go join the ACNA soon, we'll stay. And he said, I believe God called me here for this fight. And I said, it's not our fight. And that was January. So we took a vote, a parish vote in December. 700 and some voted to leave, and 20 voted to stay. And then the vestry considered that. And I talked with Mark. He really wanted us to stay through the March convention of 10. So that was Friday, Saturday. We stayed and at the convention. And on Sunday, Palm Sunday, we had our vote to leave. And Chris Hancock preached that Sunday. And he talked about a mature congregation completes what they begin. And I think at that time, I think the vote to stay, I think 16 people voted to stay. And because we had a plan worked out, we were going to potentially leave the historic church to the Diocese of South Carolina and reform a congregation, and we would keep the ministry center, and we'd subdivided our property to make them separate properties. And we also anticipated the Episcopal Church might get that. So when we subdivided the property, we left the historic church with no parking lot, which meant they could have no occupancy permit. And so, so that was 10. I went to Chuck Murphy. AMIA was rolling strong. ACNA was up. Murph made a big play, said, if you come in, I'll make you bishop. We need an evangelical charismatic bishop. I'll make you bishop. And I said, Chuck, we have come out of a bad marriage and I don't want to date anybody right now. And so I went into a provisional diocese. John Guernsey was leading it. And John said I could probably hang out there for 2 years just to kind of catch my breath. Well, 6 months later, he gets elected bishop of the Diocese of Mid-Atlantic. And he called a guy up in Charlotte named Fillmore Strunk, senior priest. And he told Fillmore, Steve Wood and another guy named John Gibson are all in the Carolinas, and you need to begin to organize a diocese of the Carolinas. And so we had our first meeting. Fillmore called it. We were at the country club in Charlotte. It was me, Fillmore, John Gibson, and John Yates. Well, that time it was still Gur Jones. Gur came over. And that just began, we just began to meet monthly for prayer. And then JY3, John Yates III came in and began to gain some traction. St. Andrews started planting a couple churches up there. We received a couple in from other traditions. I was appointed vicar general, which meant I had the administrative responsibilities of a bishop, but not the ecclesiastical authority. I couldn't ordain or confirm, but I had all the administrative responsibilities. Went through a search process. We slow walked it because we were really hopeful South Carolina might come out. So instead of forming a diocese in 1 year, it took us 2 years to form our diocese. And I nominated Carol Glenn to be the bishop, and he declined. John Yates III nominated me, and I declined. And they nominated me again, and I declined. And Archbishop Duncan called me and said, you took a vow that you would obey your bishop. It is lawful and canonical that you stand for election and allow others to have input on that. So I stood and got elected. When you get elected, you go to the College of Bishops. You have to fill out a massive theological questionnaire in writing, which they have, and a biographical information, your conversion story. You meet, after that happens, you go to wherever the synod is, or the College of Bishops is gathering, go into a chapel, and you have basically 2 hours of oral exams. You sit up front on a chair or stand, whatever you want to do, and the bishops have all your material, and it's fair game to go at you. They began with a Bible study, and one of the bishops had an interesting Bible study. He told the story of Jonah, and for him, the moral of the point that he was making was, gentlemen, we have to be very careful who we let on the boat. We can only have righteous men on the boat. So I stood up, and I said, Your Grace, to Archbishop Duncan. I said, we can end this all right now. He said, what do you mean? I said, I am not righteous nor worthy to be on the boat. I would happily withdraw my name. And there was silence for about a minute. He said, we'll proceed. And, and I got elected. I've enjoyed it.
We'll leave it there because I want to get to the other two sections.
Yep.
Pretty much, I think everybody knows, because it was a big article in the paper, that you went through COVID.
Yep.
And now you're out the other end. You look fantastic compared to how you used to look.
Thanks.
So congratulations, and all credit, especially to your wife, for soldiering through that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you tonight, just maybe one or two theological reflections, because it's a big deal. I mean, you had a pretty serious case.
Yep.
and it was very challenging as a process. But you had a lot of time to pray and to think.
Mm-hmm.
What is your sense of what God taught you? Maybe
Yeah.
one or two things.
Yeah. The first thing, and I would encourage all y'all listening, be bold in your faith, right? So Jeff Chapman, I knew him as a teenager. He came out of St. Luke's. I came out of St. Luke's. He was the rector of St. Anne's. I followed him at St. Anne's. He was at Truro in Virginia when I was at Virginia. So our lives have crossed paths many times. And he texted me. He said, I heard I got his text up. He said, I heard about your hospitalization today. Beck and I are praying for you. And he said, much love. May God make something beautiful come out of this. And I texted back. I said, thanks. Looks like I'm headed to the ICU in a ventilator. And I said, candidly, Father, my soul is unsettled. I'm hearing a voice that I'm a goat and not a sheep, and I can't find my Savior's voice. And he texted back. He said, it's never our love for him that steadies our souls, Steve, but his unbroken love for us. We know this and we teach this, but we can forget. No matter our weakness or our wavering and unsteady, too easily tempted by lying whispers of the tempter hearts, his love is true and relentless and lavish. Even if we are faithless, he is faithful. When our prayers fail, he still intercedes for us. He has you in his hands, Steve, the very safest place in a dangerous world. As you go into the hours ahead, when you have to give up conscious control of your body and place yourself into his hands, once again, yield to him afresh. He will not let you go. And
wow.
And I was put on a ventilator after that. Well, the hard part, so a bold friend, right? Just
wow.
Trusting that God would use him. Because that was a big struggle. It was hard. I mean, I heard, looking back, I had the experience of a tempter in the wilderness, not inviting me to something, but accusing me. And you're cut off, right? There's no one around.
Yeah.
And the night was tough, and I just learned hard conversations, so I was going on the ventilator, and I knew at the time, they were very candid. They said, it's a 60-40 proposition. You're not coming off this. And they said, but we'll do our best. And so they said, it'll be the morning. So whatever conversations you need to have, so talking to Jackie, I mean, I could see the panic. So they put me on the cannulas with the little oxygen, like you see people walking around, little tubes. And then they were graduating. They had this particular, I called her, I said, and I was kind of laughing, look at this mask. And her eyes got big. And I said, what does that mean? She said, it's not good. So I was talking to her about the ventilator, and I said, I'm going on, and, and telling her I loved her. And I said, and I think it's a fear. We just don't want to be forgotten. I said, remember me. And then I called each of my boys, told them I loved them. They were crying. I called them individually. They're saying, Dad, don't say this. I said, boys, you got to know, I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the men you've become. I'm proud of your families. And you need to know that. And then I went out, and they told me it would be a sleep that I wouldn't remember, except I met God. I did not see God, and I did not hear an audible voice, but there was a conscious awareness, and the voice said, you have run a good race, and you can come home if you want to. And I remember laying there, and I was so tired, because it just wipes you out. I was so tired. And this really corny poem. So I love poetry, and I memorize poetry. And I remembered this poem, Gentleman Jim Corbett, heavyweight boxing championship of the late 1800s, wrote a poem called Fight One More Round. And it said, when your arms are too weary and you can't lift them up, and you shuffle your feet to the center of your ring, and your body's so tired you just wish your opponent would crack you on the jaw and put you to sleep, fight one more round. And that poem went through my head, and I told the Lord, and they're telling me I'm not supposed to have any mental activity during this, but this is happening. And I said to the Lord, I'm so tired I can't fight, but I want to fight. And instantly, I've been to Israel many times, and I have a favorite place. And it's near the ancient town of Tell of Dan with the headwaters of the Jordan. It's this little poplar grove that right on the Lebanese border. And you're looking over, and it's just beautiful. And I hear something that sounds like an army. So think of Wizard of Oz, that tramping outside the Wicked Witch's palace. I'm hearing this through the treetops. And then I hear Psalm 91 being recited over me. And I'm thinking, and that's the last I remember. And I remember waking up thinking, okay, I knew that was Psalm 91. But what's this marching in the treetops? Well, when I woke up, I mean, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't lift my hand. I'd lost 40 pounds. I couldn't swallow. They had to teach me how to swallow again. I couldn't even swallow water. So they're having to teach me how to swallow. They were going to put a tube in because I was having a hard time. And they were going to put a peg tube in and feed me through my stomach. Couldn't operate my phone. It took a couple of days. And I finally was able to Google with my voice, Bible marching in treetops. There's two places in the Bible, same story told twice. And David was in a poplar grove, right? And it was interesting because David's been someone, we all identify or look up. And it was that, I was the young David in the field when they found me. I felt the Lord told me, be a shepherd like David. David's in the poplar grove, and the verse in 2 Chronicles says, when you hear the army of the Lord marching in the trees in the poplar grove, know that I've gone before you to fight your battle. And I thought, this is extraordinary, because going in this anxiety, I'm a goat, right? And I'm a doctor of the faith, if you use ancient bishop, right, of all this. It's like, and I was struggling with that. So reassuring. And it wasn't over by a long shot. I was in massive pain. Judith McNutt, I didn't know she was one of my intercessors. Rosemary Edwards coordinated. And I met Rosemary Edwards I was in seminary. She was a delegate from St. Luke's. I was probably 23. I was home for diocesan convention. I was sitting with the St. Luke's delegation. I noticed, she was probably in her 40s at that time. And she kept staring at me. And I went up at a break and I said, do I know you? She's like, no. She said, why are you staring? I said, why are you staring at me? Every time I look, she said, the Lord told me I was going to pray for you for the rest of your life. And she has for the last 30 years. 30 years. And,
I believe it. She's that kind of person.
She is that kind. So she had organized. So Judith had this, I was having some really bad days in the ICU post waking up. It's some really, really bad days. And Judith woke up and very early in the morning, she sent me a text and she said, quoted Jesus with the raising little girl saying to the family, do not be afraid, just believe. She said, you are going to be healed. And it was, again, the boldness of a friend to take a risk, to do something like that. And for me, it was a lifeline, and I held it, right? And it was in that healing process. The other thing I learned retrospectively was the power our children have in our lives. When they would lessen my sedation, I was like comatose for 10 days, but they'd lessen, I've done 2 different kinds. They'd lessen one kept me kind of paralyzed, so I wouldn't gag and fight the tube that was in my lungs, but the other one would kind of wake me up a little. But there was nobody home. And they would let Jackie FaceTime because they were my eyes would be open, but I was non-responsive, and they were getting worried that there was significant damage mentally. And so Jackie, they put her on FaceTime, and she was talking. And 2 things I found out. Number 1, 2 times when they had her on FaceTime, she read Psalm 91 over me. And I'm sitting here in retrospect thinking, okay, something's getting through. I didn't recognize her voice as her, but Psalm 91 was read. The other thing that happened, my son Sammy was quarantined with Jackie. He came home from Clemson because they'd shut down. And I told him, I said, look, I probably have COVID. Don't come home. And he came home anyway. So he was quarantined with Jackie, which was a good thing that she wasn't alone for all that time. But Sammy got on the phone. Jackie was talking to me. They said, your eyes, she had a picture of me. My eyes were open, tubes down my throat. I'm just blank stare, non-responsive to the doctors, non-responsive to Jackie. Sammy said, hi, Dad. And my eyes turned to the phone immediately. And the doctor said, we see this all the time, the power of our children's voice. And theologically, I began to think about my Heavenly Father. And when I talk to him, you wonder, does he hear you? And even, I don't even remember looking at him. The doctor said it's just reflexive, that the power of your children's voice can penetrate. And Sammy, immediately noticed, he's like, Dad's looking at me. And so, those kinds, the real deep assurance that came out of that. Jeff's words are still things that are very moving to me. That experience of hearing the armies and then finding a Bible verse that talks about the Lord going before me to fight my battles. Now, there are massive downstream consequences, right? I still have neuropathy, which, they think might go away in 18 to 36 months. They don't know, because you can get an ICU neuropathy, but they don't know how COVID interplays with that. So, I did. It was very humbling. It was a humbling season for me and St. Andrews. The church burned down. We were always the church that was in the position to help people. Right. And we burned down, and all of a sudden we need help. It was very humbling as a church. And this process was very humbling for me. They sent me home with a walker. They said I was going to have to use a walker for 4 months because I'd lost so much weight and I was so weak. And I used it, 4 days in the hospital and 4 days at home. And I told Jackie, I can't do this. I'm not going to give into this. And she said, well, you can't. I said, I can crawl. And so I would crawl out, and she would cry, because here's her husband crawling on the floor like a baby out of the bedroom and climbing my way up onto a couch. And I said, I'm not doing this. And it probably took a week of crawling before I could actually, kind of like a toddler, walk along walls. I had to do speech therapy. I didn't know speech also addressed mental issues, because I had some cognitive. I had a very hard time remembering because of the effects of the heavy sedation. Did that for 3.5 months. And at the end, they gave me a cognitive test. And one of them, they gave me a couple. One of them, I finished in literally 10 minutes. It was 7 questions. And she said, what'd you think about that? I said, that was pretty easy. And she pulled one out from when I was in the hospital. She said, I gave you this same test in the hospital. You answered one question in 2 hours, because I just couldn't process. So, I still forget names. I could be talking to you, Kendall, and I'd remember Harmon, but not Kendall. And so like my neighbor, his name's Bill. And I said, hey, Mr. King, because I just couldn't remember Bill. That's been humbling, right? I was not a guy that used a lot of notes when I spoke, and that's better. Sunday at 9:00, this past Sunday, for that 1 hour, I felt like me for the first time in the pulpit and leading the service. And by 10:45,
this past
Sunday, first time. And by 10:45, it was gone. But that 1 hour, I felt like me for the first time. And
not something to take for granted.
No, you don't. Well, that was the other thing. So you talk about theologically. I was convicted about presumption. I assumed I had a tomorrow. I was 56. And the Lord really convicted me about how presumptuous I was about life. And so now it's typically, Craig asked me if I do this. I said, yeah, God willing. So that's become real, not just vocabulary, but it's an awareness, man. Life's tenuous.
Yeah.
Precious.
It's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
You made me think of the churches in Syria, and when they say goodbye on Sunday because of the situation in Syria, they say it as if they're not going to see them, because they don't presume that they will make it through the week.
Yeah.
So goodbye with a real fervent sense that I might not make it through the week. That's the way, because they have to live that way.
Oh yeah.
And you read something like that and you say, actually that's the way we should all be living all the time.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the gratitude is not worn off. Sometimes you're grateful for something and it is fresh every day still. And a prayer is, please keep it fresh. I don't want to lose that sense of gratitude.
We're out of time. I want to we have one final privilege. Our final habit is we try to bring all the people on video who've been watching, so they can wave. So I want to give everybody. No, we want more people than just you.
good to see
Everybody,
some
turn
familiar
your video
faces there.
on. Here we go.
Hey guys, good seeing y'all. Really good being
There
with
we
you.
go.
Hey,
Really great to see you, Steve. Well
Thank
done.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was really, really good.
good. Well, it's good to be with you. You have a great church. I'm praying for you through your transition process. You know, I'm partial to Craig and Nancy. They're very old friends and very dear. We have really shared some tender moments together, and you have been blessed by his leadership and their leadership, and you're in my prayers as you make a transition.
Thank you, brother. And thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. It's great to
Yep.
see you. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks, Peter.
Godspeed. Our best to Jackie. Godspeed. Bye.
Bye.